Hi, this time I wanted to talk about another, I guess you could say, process that you can use in solo horror role playing games. You may remember from a recent video that I made where I talked about horror immersion in solo role playing games. However, I don't know what I got things a bit mixed up because Hugh Jans, one of my viewers, he asked if I could talk about suspense in solo horror role playing games. So I ended up thinking about immersion rather than suspense. I think that some things that I said in that video also apply to um, also help when generating suspense in a solo RPG session. But today I really want to zoom in or focus on suspense and also on a couple of things that Huygens said in his recent comment about scaring yourself in a solo role playing game. And he mentioned something about preparing his game table because in my other video, and I'm going to put the link in the description below to that video, I talked about how you could create like a good ambience or mood through music and using props and such. So Huygens was going to dress up his table for the horror experience, and that got me thinking about another thing. So I hope that I will offer some useful information today in this video. Before we get started, if you haven't checked the Drive to RPG site yet, they are currently with their Halloween sale, and they also have that Halloween hunt that I mentioned in my other video. I'm going to put in a list in the comments of this video to the sections of Drive to RPG and the sister sites where you can get different free role-playing games, modules, etc. I got a little worried at first because it was taking quite a while for Drive to RPG to bring out that sale, that event, but it ended up happening somewhat fast after I checked. Although it was glitched at first, I had to send an email. I'm sure a lot of other people sent emails to fix that. So now it is completely working. So please check out the comment, get some free role-playing games and modules. And if you find other things, because I'm sure there are probably 2 or 3 more places that I haven't checked, please let us know in the comment section if you saw another part of the website that also contained a Halloween icon that gave you free stuff. So let's begin. Oh, another thing that I forgot to mention. Maybe some of you remember my recommendations of solo rules for Mothership and Dark Streets, Darker Secrets. Those solo supplements. The author has a YouTube channel. I'm going to put a link in the description below. His channel focuses completely on solo role playing, and he's also telling about his new releases and past releases, of course. So if you want to check that out, if you enjoy solo role playing, definitely check out his channel. The link will be in the description. So let's begin. Horror is truly a difficult thing to accomplish at the gaming table, even in standard sessions when you play with your players, because there is a sort of extreme element to it. That is, when you play role-playing games, you either get really scared or you simply cannot find that pull or that drive to scare yourself and others, because role-playing games are effectively safe spaces. Although that term has been wrongfully used in present times, in my opinion, role-playing games are truly safe spaces because if your player character dies in the game, you're not going to die in real life. And if you kill something in the fictional environment, you're not going to kill anything in real life. So it's not connected to reality in a ridiculous way, like for example that tract from Jack Chick, Dark Dungeons, where the player killed herself because her player character died in the game. So yeah, that was a Christian exaggeration of role-playing games. But effectively, role-playing games really are safe spaces. So whenever the players want to scare themselves, they always run that risk of actually remembering that they are at a physical table playing with family and friends, and when they become aware of that reality, then they no longer feel afraid, they feel safe. Nothing that happens in the game is going to happen to them in real life. So on the other hand, sometimes you really get into the experience and you really feel a lot of fright if you manage to accomplish that magical feeling of getting pulled into the game and suddenly you're experiencing what your character is feeling, or when confronting different horrors. That's one of the greatest things in role-playing games. You live the adventure even stronger than when reading a book or watching a movie or reading comic books or playing a video game, because with a role-playing game there are so many possibilities and everything is so driven by your imagination. You're actually having this sort of experience where you're actually your thoughts and your mind suddenly feels transported into that world. But like I said, it's very easy to break the spell, to put it in a way, and suddenly you remember that you're playing at the table, rolling dice and such. So yes, it's a challenging thing to create that suspense and fear atmosphere. Atmosphere. So I wanted to give some tips on how to accomplish this when playing solo role-playing games, and of course, these tips and advice you could also use them with a standard role-playing session with your players, or with your game master, of course. Mm, when I talked about ambience by using music and those environment sounds that you can easily find in YouTube, I forgot to talk more about the physical environment, and this came to my mind because of what Huygens said, that he planned to dress up his table. So that's a really good idea of using those props at the table. You can place perhaps those Halloween sort of objects, like plastic skulls or cauldrons and anything that you find, spiders, anything related to the adventure. And this also applies to any role-playing game session. Regardless of the theme, you can always place some objects. If, for example, you are playing a sci-fi RPG, you could probably set up some futuristic arrangement. You could use some objects that you would expect to find in a spaceship, some props that you have here and there. If you're playing like a pirate game, maybe you can use one of those treasure chests and spread out some coins at the table. Put one of those like prop pistols or pirate cutlasses and such, just like to create the mood. It depends on what you are searching for the experience. But then I got thinking about a few times that I played with my group, that we played outside at night in my garden. There are some very unusual places in my garden, some really magical places in my opinion. It's fairly big, not too big, but sufficient enough that when you go out at night, it feels quite magical. Mm. I think one of the greatest LARPing experiences that I've had in my life, and I'm not too much into. I actually never been like a big LARP or a player or LARPer, because probably in my entire life I've only tried it like 3 times, and it was somewhat improvised. But if we were to count a few Halloween parties that we had in my house many years back, the garden completely transformed into this enchanted or haunted forest with the proper arrangements. We had like a rally where you needed to go around dressed as some sort of monster. This is when early in my early teenage years, you needed to dress like a monster and act like a monster, and you needed to collect some clues and items, and the winner ended up with this big yeah, like a pumpkin full of candy. I actually disapprove many of the things that I did in the past when it comes to Halloween, because all of those candy, they're literally poison in my opinion. Now don't get me wrong, that's not saying that you cannot have healthy candy, that is, but it's better if you make it yourself at home with natural ingredients using honey and pure cane sugar, not the refined white one, using the best ingredients. Then you can have some healthy Halloween treats. But back then we ate a lot of toxic things, terrible. But that's not the important part. The important part is that my entire garden transformed into this forest filled with ghosts and ghouls and demons and all of that, and fairies and anything related to like spooky things. And I mean fairies like fairies in folklore, not the typical Walt Disney ones. I'm talking about the ones that appear in folklore that end up killing and cursing people. Not all of them, of course, but depends on the story. So, Huygens, I would recommend that if you want to experiment some sort more suspense or fear in solo horror role playing games, I recommend that you try playing those games at night outside if you have like a garden or your patio, your backyard, etc. Just try playing during the night and you will see that the entire thing transforms magically, because aside from those rally experiences that I told you, a few times I have played with my group outside and it feels so mysterious. Suddenly you are more aware of your environment, not spooked but just paying attention. And it is funny because when you pay attention to those sounds, those shadows, the darkness, the trees moving, it kind of enhances the setting of the game, of the horror module that you are running. It's very different from when you are just playing at the table, because we all know those tips that dimming the lights, using some props, putting the right sounds. But when you go outside, it's like the entire environment fuels your imagination to better experience the fear and suspense in the game. So yeah, I definitely recommend that you try playing a solo session outside, getting in touch with nature. Now, moving a bit away from that, we could also enhance the solo role playing horror experience with suspense and fear if we could become aware of what truly generates suspense and fear connected to random results in a solo experience. Everything that happens in your solo horror RPG must have a thematical and mechanical impact. Now, what do I mean by this? Anything that you generate using your tables, if you're using a game master emulator, any answers that you obtain by asking questions, or if you are using Abraham's method. If you don't know what Abraham's method is, I'm going to put the link in the description below. Remember that it's a method to run any pre-written module or campaign as a solo game master with emulated players. So if you're using Abraham's method, the interpretation that you obtain when rolling to check the results of the cards, all of those results need to have an impact on the theme and the rules, or how the rules proceed in your session. So for example, maybe your characters receive information that a non-player character has been kidnapped or has been murdered. They arrive at the scene of the crime and they find that everything is covered with slime. Maybe it's something that you generated by asking questions, like asking, is there some sort of clue that looks very weird or unearthly or something like that? And if you get a yes, you could ask something that, do we find some strange substance? And then you ask if it's slime. So maybe the entire place is covered with some sort of ectoplasm or slime. And then something very disturbing happens. Maybe based on your results and according to your imagination, you find a voodoo doll on a table with some pins on it. and the voodoo doll looks exactly like one of the player characters, or the player character if you're only running the adventure with just one. So that starts to get really creepy, because do not underestimate the capacity to scare yourself. That is, we are constantly scaring ourselves and sometimes each other, even with real life situations. So it's very easy for you to generate that sense of fear and suspense of what is going to happen. Mm. If you haven't seen my session, my recent video of From the Ashes, I'm going to put the link in the description below. I had a few moments that I was quite scared for Corvus, and there was suspense whenever I was rolling to see if he got some random encounters. Every time I crossed that swamp in the game, I always fear for Corvus's life. It happens the same when I'm running a game for my players. Even though I am quite ruthless and strict when it comes to the results, that is, I'm not pulling any punches when it comes to character death and such. I always feel afraid for the players, for their player characters. They attempt some really risky things at times, and in that session with Corvus, in my recent session, Corvus did just that. It acted in a way that really had me nervous as to what was going to happen to him. So I think that's an important part of creating suspense and fear in a solo role-playing experience. You feel that dread of what the character is going to do, of the types of encounters that he is going to face. Now when it comes to a mechanical encounter, because what I told you of the room covered with slime where a non-player character was killed or kidnapped, a non-player character that was perhaps a loved one, an ally, a boss, or a servant of the player character, and the room is covered with slime and you have this voodoo doll with pins on it, that has an impact on the theme, because if the non-player character was kidnapped, where is that character now? Is that character still alive? And why is that voodoo doll made to resemble that player character? What is going to happen to the player character that looks like the voodoo doll? So you start to think about that, so that creates that suspense within the fiction. And every time you're going to roll to obtain different results, depending on the tables or Game Master emulator, or if you're using Abraham's method, every time you make those rolls, you have that expectation, that a moment of a bit of tension before everything just breaks loose with a monster, a terrifying clue, some sort of encounter related to the horror element. But when it comes to a mechanical impact, anything related to curses, the mutilation of the player character's body, perhaps inflicting penalties if you end up losing your eye or your hands, or your hands, sorry. If you end up losing both hands, that would be incredibly unfortunate. So that's going to inflict some heavy penalty on your player character. If you end up cursed, many Lamentations of the Flame Princess modules, they have those horrible results. Even one of the spells, if I remember correctly, the summoning one has some pretty nasty results. So that creates that suspense. You do not know what you're going to get when you use some magical items or forbidden spells. You never know what's going to happen, and it will probably end up affecting your character in a negative way. If things go badly, you're going to suffer for it. And you can also combine both things, because, for example, what if the player character owns this sort of mansion or house, and he gets up in the morning and walks down the stairs, and you have like a portrait of the player character there, and you see that there is like a bloody smile drawn on the portrait of the player character. What does that mean? And suddenly the player character starts to get some penalties to his different skill checks and attacks. It's a similar thing or case when it comes to undead enemies that have all those nasty abilities like level drain, one of the most hated abilities probably. Every time I remember when I used to run Ravenloft a lot, my players were constantly in panic of finding those enemies like shadows that they drain strength, if I remember correctly, in AD&D, and the whites that drain an entire level. And in one particular Ravenloft campaign, there are some really nasty weapons that drain levels as well. So they hate the player characters hate that, and the players, because not only does it make you less effective in combat, it also generates that suspense that they don't even want to get near those enemies. So that's a way in which they feel a bit of dread, of fear of those encounters. It's a mechanical impact, but at the same time, the enemies are quite nasty. They look horrible. They are usually related to the major problems in the campaign. Like I said, using the attachments, the emotional attachments that the player characters have to their favorite non-player characters. Maybe they have this character running the store and he always gives them the best prices, or maybe they are friends with the captain of the guard or this soldier or this explorer, and they have even adventured together. It's always a great idea to target the non-player characters. The players are going to feel fear about that. They are going to feel worried about the fate of those non-player characters. But taking all of this together, it's also very important for you to want to get scared. Just like in when running things with your group, if you do not get into that social contract mentality of being willing to scare yourselves and others of experiencing fear, you won't, it simply won't happen. If you're constantly telling jokes, if you're thinking about funny things and trying to remember that it's just a game and all of that, then it's going to be impossible for you to experience fear. So that's also important in when you play a solo horror RPG. You need to want to have that desire, that drive to scare yourself. When I played the English rural horror storytelling game for one player, I'm going to put the link in the description below to my review of that game. They actually released the second edition somewhat recently. I haven't played that one, it's probably very good. In that review, you're going to see how I scared myself quite a bit as I was following the narrative, the fiction of that game. I imagined very disturbing things. So yeah, you have to almost like undergo a self-hypnosis sort of experience in which you are actually seeing and smelling and hearing things within the fiction. Any mental tool that you can use to further enhance this experience. Maybe you want you like meditation, or maybe you just like to relax and let your mind wander for a bit. All of that is going to help you create that fictional suspenseful horror experience. So yes, that's a very important part of the thing, of the considerations to take in mind, or when you are running a horror role-playing game, you need to get into that mindset that you want to scare yourself. So well, I hope that these tips are informative or helpful. Maybe they are similar to other tips and advice that you can find out there. Horror in role-playing games has been tackled several times in books and videos, but hopefully maybe this video will present a somewhat different approach, or a way to analyze things. I understand that some things look quite similar to other things that have already been said dozens of times, if not hundreds of times, but just try to take all of this into a package of things that you can use to better experience suspense and horror. So just to sum things up, you need this willingness to scare yourself, or this drive to scare yourself. Get yourself a good Game Master emulator, or if, like I said, if you are using Abraham's method, make your rolls with your tables, with your cards, anything that you are using. create that suspense. If you want to create your own tables, then you should do it. Create many results so that you never know what you are going to get. Think of the nastiest, most ghastly things that you can imagine. Maybe you can just write like a general idea, so when you generate that result, you make other rolls so that you never know what is going to happen. So maybe your character entered this abandoned cabin in the woods. You make a roll to see what you find there, and it says something like ghost. But what sort of ghost? Make your rolls in other tables to see if it's a horrifying looking ghost. Maybe it's a ghost that is quite bloated with worms crawling out of the eye sockets, and he has like a butcher's knife or a cleaver. Maybe that's something that you generate. So tables are crucial, and the interpretation of the results of the tables or the questions that you are asking is going to be crucial to generate that suspense and that fear, and really get yourself into that experience. Change your environment in real life. Like I said, maybe go outside at night in your garden or a patio or whatever, backyard, and listen to the sounds of the night, and play with some dim lights, and make sure all of those results that you get on tables are both thematical and mechanical, that they have that impact both on the story, on how it affects the those results affect non-player characters, the game world, the player characters themselves, and of course those penalties and downward spiral sort of moments because your sanity is draining or because the character is taking some really nasty wounds. All of that is going to contribute to the horror solo RPG experience. Well, thanks for watching this video. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. Only in a few, well, in a bit more than a week, it's going to be Halloween. I will see if I can come out with some other horror related videos. I have a couple of ideas for two more videos at least related to this scary October sort of season. So I hope that I will bring out those videos this week, if not the next one. So really, thank you for watching this video. If you have any comments or questions, like I said, please write them down in the comment section. And thank you so much to those that have been sending Drive-Thru RPG gift certificates to support the channel. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you, and see you later.